interest rates. Not to be a shock, you asked how the family business was doing back in Michigan. Families involved in sand and gravel and aggregates and construction and things like that. It's been strong. We need more labor. We need a few other things on that, what's happening. But I mean, I think there's no recession. That's been established. There's no hyperinflation, or certainly not as what some had been projecting. Yet there seems to be higher than expected or certainly desired interest rates for many of us. And I'm curious how high interest rates, they hurt Americans who are paying car loans, credit cards, mortgages. Just this morning, you had FA Director Pulte asking for lower interest rates, which would obviously impact home buyers as well. So what is it that's keeping, in your mind, the Fed from what many of us believe is the right thing to do, which is to lower some interest rates, and by the way, match what the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Swiss Central Bank, a number of emerging central banks, by the way, that's your own assessment on page 33, as where you're laying that out. Why aren't we doing what the rest of the world is doing? Is it because we're at full employment? Is it because of those tariff concerns that you said weren't part of the analysis? Was it energy, groceries, durable goods? Why?
So you're right that if you just look in the rearview mirror and look at the existing data that we've seen, you can make a good argument that that would call for us to be at a neutral level, which would be, a couple of cuts or maybe more kind of thing. The reason we're not is the forecast by all professional forecasters that I know of on the outside and the Fed do expect a meaningful increase in inflation over the course of this year. When I said we weren't going to talk about tariffs and inflation, that was to say until we see what the policies are. And so now we know a lot more. It's 6 months since I said that. So anyway, I'd be happy to continue this with you.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Chair Powell, last month there was research published in the Journal of Urban Health that found that more than half of Black women of reproductive age, that's the term they use, in the counties that I represent, that had experienced some sort of eviction during their lifetime. So that's like 50% of Black women in the two largest counties, Wayne County and Oakland County in Michigan. And these numbers are horrific. As you know, were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
And evictions are often very traumatic experience, but also it creates a cycle of poverty, but also this instability for many families. But especially when it comes to a lot of our Black neighbors, the access to equity, the access to housing is diminished even more. In Michigan, we lost more Black home ownership than any other state in the country during the last recession. So we know the housing crisis, I believe, is structural, and some may say it's a policy choice. While there are many factors at play, and you know this, Chairman, high mortgage rates, the finance rates and so forth, that drag the supply of new housing. But last month, new housing hit a 5-year low. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure exactly what statistic you are referring to.
Okay, I don't know. There was all this articles about the housing market and the impact of tariffs and so forth, and they said, again, it hit a 5-year low. And again, I'm getting this from a source. But this sets the market up for higher inflation and more burdensome housing costs to years to come. So Chairman Powell, I'm looking at this monetary whatever policy framework that you guys have put together. Do you think that the way it's structured, and again, I'm trying to understand how you're looking at this in the housing crisis, do you believe it's eroding new rental supply under construction right now, leading to high inflation in future years?
So I think there are two things going on quickly. One is just there's a longer run shortage of housing in the United States, which there's nothing that the Fed can do about. That's not something we can affect.
Well,
there's also, if I may say, in the short run, rates are high, and that's going to weigh on housing activity. But the best thing we can do for the housing market, the absolute best thing, is to restore price stability so that rates come down and so that rates can be at a level that people can afford.
But don't you think that the restrictive monetary policy the framework you all put together undermines long-term price stability right now? by reducing the supply?
No, I mean, I think it
you're
restores
reducing supply.
price stability. The point of higher rates is to, and
So
it
you don't think
does
the
affect-
higher rates is impacting future supply of housing?
So I think what that does is, I think interest-sensitive sectors like housing are very much directly affected when we cut rates or when we raise rates. That's right. But that's part of the mechanism for restoring general price stability.
So keeping the high interest rates does not impact future supply of housing?
It does not, over the
I
long,
need to go back to talk to
over the long run,
women that the
the
study.
Fed will not be, our policy will not be a driver of longer-run housing supply in the United States.
Okay, let me ask you, what is the difference? And honestly, confused, I want to learn here, and I'm sure people listening to this want to learn. What is the difference between demand-driven rent inflation and supply-driven rent inflation? Like, you guys use these terminology. What is that? How do I communicate that to the public? What is the difference between supply-driven versus demand-driven rent?
Those are not terms that we use particularly often.
What's
but
supply-driven formula?
that would mean, that there's not enough supply to meet demand. But at the same time, it also means there's more demand than there is supply.
So are you guys ignoring that?
No, but as I said again, our policies will not affect in the long run,
No, I'm being
either
serious,
demand
because I
or
see somebody
supply
behind you
in
kind of
housing.
shaking. I'm being serious, y'all. We're talking about a housing crisis that is getting worse right now because we're not paying attention to future instability that the current rates, and you can raise your eyebrows and all this stuff behind. I don't know. I mean, do you understand? Like, I come from a community right now that I believe is now being impacted by the current framework that you're putting together, that I do feel like it's going to be long-term effects on the housing crisis, and you're ignoring it.
No, we're not, actually. We think the very best thing we can do is to fully restore price stability at the aggregate level. That will be the best thing for homeowners and for home
Even though the
builders and
housing
everybody
supply
else.
has been
In the
impacted by the
long
high
run, that
interest.
is the single
But
thing
Chairman
that
Powell,
Congress
you
has
see where I'm
assigned us
coming
to
from.
do.
But you see where I'm coming from. It is impacting future supply of housing, right?
Not in the long run, no.
Okay. Well,
Gentlewoman's
Mr.
time
Chair,
has
thank you.
expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stile, who's also the chair of our Subcommittee on Digital Assets, Financial Technology, and Artificial Intelligence. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hill. Thank you, Chairman Powell, for being with us today. I want to dive into two actions the Fed's recently taken to get a little additional color on. Yesterday, the Fed announced that reputational risk would no longer be a component in bank exams. I viewed that positively. I viewed the reputational risk as often being a catch-all for political bias. I think it's positive to depoliticize bank exams and instead focus on the core and measurable risks. Could you provide color as to whether or not any new information came to light that led to the decision of the Fed to remove that yesterday?
I'm not aware of any new information. No, we just think it's the right thing to do, and of course made an announcement on Monday under Governor Bowman's, Vice Chair Bowman's leadership.
Why would it not have been done previously if it's the right thing to do? I agree with you, it's the right thing to do. Why was it? Any timeline as to why that was done yesterday versus previously?
No, I think this is a problem that we came to understand as a problem over the course of the last couple of years, and began considering what's going on here. We're hearing a lot of reports of debanking and that sort of thing, and over the course of really 2024 came to the view that this was a serious problem that we need to address, and we've said that publicly, and now we're doing this, and so are the other agencies, by the way.
I appreciate you taking that action. I do agree that there were real political bias in some of those exams, in particular as it related to regulated entities engaged in the digital asset space. Let me shift into the digital asset space if I can. Another action recently taken by the Fed, the Novel Activities Supervision Program was ended and withdrew several statements on digital asset related risks that deterred bank involvement in particular. You in the Fed and others at the Fed have spoken positively about the House and Senate work to regulate stablecoin in particular, a real opportunity to dollarize the globe and be a significant purchaser of U.S. Treasuries. Following that action by the Fed, have you seen an identifiable shift in banks or other regulated entities as it relates to engagement in the digital asset space?
I wouldn't be the one to be picking that up first, but what I do see is a very significant change in the tone, and it really does reflect evolving thinking and the evolving status of the crypto industry, and I would expect over time we'll see more activity.
How is the Fed evaluating and overseeing banks or other regulated entities that are in the digital assets or crypto space?
So our view is that banks get to decide who their customers are. That's not our decision. And so banks are free to provide banking services to the crypto industry, to crypto companies. And banks are also free to conduct crypto activities as long as they do so in a way that is, protective of safety and soundness.
Thank you very much. Let me shift gears because I want to give you just a little bit of an opportunity to comment on the housing sector once again, but give you a little freedom here to speak to that area. You correctly are trying to balance inflation and price stability, but also higher rates have a significant impact on the housing market as shelter and housing costs are a significant driver of why many families can't afford the things that they need. Can you provide color as to how you're analyzing the impact that housing and shelter costs have on families and on inflation with your desire to maintain price stability, the interest rates that is currently set by the Fed?
Sure. So, we realize that people are feeling high housing costs and high financing costs. In terms of inflation, we look at something called owner's equivalent rent and rentals, and that's meant to capture both rented housing and owned housing. And it's been very sticky. It's been one of the stickiest parts of inflation. I'm happy to say now it actually is coming down quite regularly. That's very good news. That's been the part, really it's been the service inflation that's been stickier than other parts of inflation. So that's good news for people, I think, and it is showing through into measured inflation now. Again, in the long run, the best thing we can do is restore price stability and let the market work. Even then, though, we're still going to have a housing shortage.
What data do you think is leading to the reduction in the rent equivalent?
I just think it took time. So the thought is when you would think that if rents come up every year, you would think it would take 1 year or 2 years for a lack of growth in rents to show up in a lack of growth in housing prices. It turns out it takes 4 years or 3 years. If you're an existing tenant, it's a complicated thought, but if you're an existing tenant, you don't actually catch up the way you would if new tenants came in. And so that's made the measurement of inflation stickier. But I'm happy to say we've been through that period now, and we are really seeing now housing services inflation pretty close to where it was when inflation was solidly at 2%.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California, Mr. Liccardo, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your testimony today. I appreciate that your dual mandate is full employment and price stability, and I appreciate your efforts on behalf of our country to achieve those. My understanding is that critical data is collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to help formulate the indicators that you rely on, that we rely on to understand unemployment rates, CPI, and other inflation indicators. We are certainly hearing a lot about the impacts of DOGE on our workforce, and specifically about the elimination of many of those positions in BLS. And now we have a proposal in front of Congress to cut $56 million from that agency. Are you concerned about the ability of your team to get accurate data and about the ability to have reliable indicators to make good decisions upon?
I wouldn't say that I'm concerned about the data today, although clearly there has been a very mild degradation of the scope of the surveys and things like that. But I would say the direction of travel is something I'm concerned about, and that is measuring the U.S. economy carefully and well is a project that's been going on, and we're getting better at it for 100 years and more. And it's really important, not just for the Fed, but for Congress and for businesses, frankly, to know what really is going on in the economy. What's happening? Is growth high? Is it low? And all those sorts of things. So I think it's a smart investment to just continually try to get better at measurement of what's happening in the economy. And I don't like to see that, the kind of stories I'm reading and the idea being that the data is going to become more volatile and less reliable. That'll make it more difficult for the private sector and for you and for us, and I don't like to see that direction.
I agree. Thank you. I appreciate that it's not your role to comment on the advisability of specific policies, but given your critical role in ensuring price stability and reducing inflation, I have had conversations with quite recently, just a week ago, with a C-suite executive of a major global retailer who informed me, because I asked, why aren't we seeing the impact of these tariffs and price data yet? And he said, it's coming in the third quarter, because it takes time for tariffs to work their way through a distribution chain. Often what you have on the shelf today may have been imported 2 or 3 months ago. Is that your understanding? Do you anticipate there may be impacts down the road?
Yeah, that's very much what I hear. I happened to meet with an unusually large number of business people in this last FOMC cycle, and that's a typical thing that they'll say, especially the retailers, that what's being sold now was in inventory in February, let's say, and it just isn't showing up yet. So we do expect to show up, tariff inflation to show up more, but I want to be honest, we really don't know how much of that's going to be passed through to the consumers. We just don't know, and we won't know until we see it. It could be lower than we expect, it could be higher. We have to wait and see, which is kind of what we're doing.
I appreciate the uncertainty. Another thing he told me that had me very concerned was that often they will increase prices on goods not subjected to tariffs to compensate for the very substantial losses they have to suffer with the increase of tariffs on relatively price elastic goods. So in other words, necessities will also tend to bear a higher price, even if they're not subjected to tariffs. Is that your understanding of the potential impacts?
That very much is something that companies will tell you that they do. If they can't cover the losses on the thing that's being tariffed, they'll find other ways to do it. We actually don't have prominent examples of that yet, but that's certainly a possibility, and that did happen in the last tariff episode with washing machines and dryers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And finally, there's indications in the introduction of the report that the Fed is losing its ability, as we see interest rates getting closer and closer to the minimum threshold, the ability to stimulate this economy in times of recession. We haven't had a recession, or at least we haven't had an extended recession in a decade and a half. I am particularly concerned now as we are looking at debt that is being considered to be imposed on future generations by this particular bill. Could there be a combination of very high debt and very little room to move in monetary policy that could undermine our ability to respond to the next recession?
So we faced that issue quite a bit in the era of very low interest rates, but we're at higher levels of interest rates now, so there's significantly more room to cut than there was then.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Powell, thanks for being here today. Appreciate it. I want to go back to something we had some brief discussions about this in the past, but in September of 2024, with core inflation still being above target and the labor market was holding steady at the time, the Fed made a decision to cut rates by a full 0.5 percentage point. It kind of raised some serious questions as to whether or not the data truly supported such a move at that time, and I think some of us were surprised that it was a full 0.5%. So can you revisit that again, what the Fed was thinking at that time? Because it seems to be somewhat of an enigma now. It stands out as, why was this done? Why was the 0.5% done at that point?
I'd be glad to. So first of all, actually the inflation and employment readings were very similar then to what they are now. They weren't terribly a tenth or two.
Right.
But the difference then was, you mentioned that the labor market was stable. It wasn't. The unemployment rate had actually gone up almost a full percentage point. I was very clear about this. We were very clear about it in real time too. The concern at that time was that there really hasn't been an experience, or hadn't been an experience in the modern era in which the unemployment rate has gone up close to 1% that hasn't been followed by much higher levels of unemployment and a recession. So we were looking at that and saying, and remember, at the point we're talking about, the federal funds rate was 5.3%, so definitely a very restrictive level. We were the last of the big central banks to cut. So we wanted to make a statement that we were supportive of the labor market and not just inflation. We've been focusing on inflation. I was quite clear about this. So it was all about the labor market. Inflation was the same, and unemployment was roughly the same, but it was the rate of change with the unemployment rate that raised a lot of concerns. And remember, we were being criticized for being late to cut. So we could have done 25. If we'd done 25 in July, we were criticized for not cutting in July. Instead, we cut 50 in September, and it seemed like the right thing to do. And at the end of the day, we do what we think is the right thing when we think it's the right thing to do. We don't take into consideration political factors. If we start doing that, I don't know where that stops. Once you start considering elections and stuff like that, where does it stop? So
No, and I didn't want to insinuate that it had anything to do with the election itself, but there just seems to be some very similar numbers right now. And I'm wondering, and I don't bring this up because I want to kind of make a point about did the Fed do the right thing or not. I bring it up because it seems like everything's in place right now to kind of do the same thing, make the same move. I know this morning already, you've talked a little bit about where you were on inflation right now and kind of what you're watching, but is there any lesson there? I mean, are we in a position where it would be appropriate to do something as big as a 0.5% cut again?
Well, look, as I said earlier, if you just look at the basic data and don't look at the forecast, you would say that we would have continued cutting. The difference, of course, is at this time, all forecasters are expecting pretty soon that some significant inflation will show up from tariffs. Now, and we can't just ignore that. But we're not. We're just saying let's wait and see more. That's all we're doing. And if you will have noticed, a substantial majority of the committee has written down rate cuts in the remaining 4 meetings this year. So it's just a question of being prudent and careful. But at a time when the labor market is still strong, we don't see weakness in the labor market. If we did, that would change things. We're going to continue to adapt as the data adapt. But that is the difference between then and now. Then, inflation was forecasted to continue to come down. Here, it's forecasted to go up by all forecasters. So, and again, we're not overreacting to that. We're just saying, hey, as long as the economy's strong, we can take a little bit of a pause here. And that's what we're doing. And again, continue to adapt as the data comes in. If we see data that suggests that inflation's not going to produce big increases, that would matter. And if we saw the labor market weakening, that would matter too. But we don't see those things.
What about supply chain? In 2020, that was a big issue, obviously related to COVID. But I know myself and other members, when we're in our districts and we're specifically talking to light manufacturing, there's concerns about the supply chain. Is that part of the data package that you review when you make a decision about where we're headed in the future?
Very much so. I think that's one of the great, we won't call it a great thing, but one of the lessons to be taken from the last episode is supply chains really matter. We're watching that carefully. It's too soon to say really on that. We're not seeing it yet, but we could.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I'm deeply concerned about the threat of Iranian cyber attacks on our financial system as retaliation for our strikes on their nuclear facilities. In its cybersecurity report last year, the Fed acknowledged that critical infrastructure, including financial services, is at risk with rising geopolitical tensions. Iran has a history of targeting American infrastructure companies and financial institutions and banks, which could obviously threaten and cause economic damage. What actions is the Fed taking now to monitor and defend against Iranian or proxy cyber threats targeting our country's financial institutions?
So we're in touch with the other regulators and the parts of the government that work on cyber, as you know, and we're in touch with the banks to say, for people to be on the alert for things like that to happen, and also we're on the alert because we're a target as well. So you're right to raise it. It's a big issue, and
do you feel like you have the resources right now to be prepared for that?
Yes, I mean I think we do. We spend a lot, and the government generally spends a lot on these things, and but you can never ever be comfortable in this area because the bad guys are always getting better. So we need to get better.
Thank you, Chairman. Switching gears, the President and members of his administration have recently called you out, various name calling for certain decisions you've made. I know that some people worry that the President's bullying will impact your decision making. I know you work together, and I know that and respect, obviously, your independence greatly. Anything you want to add and give you a chance to reiterate your independence to the American people?
Yeah, I would just say we're focused on one thing, and that is we want to deliver a good economy for the benefit of the American people. That's it. And anything else is kind of a distraction. I don't mean to refer to any particular thing, but we stay focused on that task all the time. We always do what we think is the right thing to do. And, you know, we live with the consequences. And I don't know how else to do the job.
Right, so the name calling and the Mr. Too Late and all that stuff, the American people shouldn't worry about that. You're focused on being independent.
Just, yeah, that's what I care about. I care about doing the job for the American people. The things we do matter a lot for people's lives, and that really concentrates the mind. You know, you want to just stay focused on that task. As long as you're sitting in these chairs that we occupy, focus on that task, do what you think is the right thing, and take the consequences.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've previously stated that you view stablecoins as a form of money. Payment stablecoins are already being used for both retail and wholesale payments, as well as for settlement. Recently, this committee passed the Stablecoin Act and the Senate passed the Genius Act, both aiming to establish clear regulatory frameworks for fully reserved dollar-backed payment stablecoins. Given their design to maintain a stable value and be redeemable for U.S. dollars, should the SEC or other regulators explore treating these stablecoins as cash equivalents for accounting or financial reporting purposes?
So let me say, I think it's a great thing that bills are moving. We need a stablecoin framework on that particular issue. I don't have a view for you. I can come back to you on that.
I'd be grateful. Thank you. High rates have also caused, as we've discussed, the cost of paying off our nation's debt to skyrocket. The CBO estimates that interest payments will cost the U.S. $1 trillion in fiscal year 2026 and continue to rise to almost $1.8 trillion by FY 2035. How do you see us continuing to be able to afford to pay off our debt at this rate? And as the U.S. continues to borrow, how does that impact your decision to keep or cut rates? Obviously, foreign countries like Japan, who are significant buyers of our bonds, have started decreasing their purchases significantly. Other internal pressures worldwide are having that impact. Are you worried about this global issue?
You know, fiscal policy and it really is not our job, and it's not something we take into consideration in making monetary policy. That's really elected people's jobs. And I would add that, you know, for some time now, the U.S. federal fiscal policy has been on an unsustainable path, and, you know, I'll limit myself to that.
Last question. Last week, you chose to keep rates steady, and families in our state, as you'll hear from a lot of people today, are really struggling with the higher cost of borrowing and putting off bigger purchases on things like cars and homes. As a result, their wallets being crushed by these price hikes and obviously the president's tariffs. What do you have to say to Jersey families who are struggling with higher costs, and how you look at how they should forecast themselves for their own families?
We're committed to returning inflation sustainably to 2% and keeping it there in the long run. And what we're doing now is we had cut rates by 100 basis points, so they've come down quite a bit. And you know, when the time is right, I expect that will continue, and that will depend on economic factors, you know, in the coming months for starters.